Okay, we're back, and it's the later '80s now, and yet the Norris Division still sucks. What is it with the Norris Division? Well, the Norris Division doesn't have a single team at 500, not one. The St. Louis Blues lead the division with a 32, 33, and 15 record, followed by the Red Wings at 34, 36, and 10. Watch those Red Wings; they're about to get pretty good. The Blackhawks 29, 37, and 14. The Toronto Maple Leafs 32, 42, and 6. And the Minnesota North Stars 30, 40, and 10. So we're in an era now where the Norris still sucks, but Detroit's getting better. That Yzerman kid, I'm telling you, he's going to be something. The Smythe Division, well, the Oilers are the only team to hit 50 wins this year. They go 50, 24, and 6, followed by Calgary at 46, 31, and 3. The Winnipeg Jets, 40, 32, and 8. The LA Kings make the playoffs, 31, 41, and 8. And Vancouver, 29, 43, and 8. They fall out, even though they have many more points than they had the season before, which shows just how bad the league is. Well, it's 7 more points than they had the year before, but it shows just how bad that division has been, that they made the playoffs with 59 points the year before. The Adams Division, Hartford and Quebec switch spots. Hartford 43, 30, and 7. Montreal 41, 29, and 10. Boston 39, 34, and 7. Quebec 31, 39, and 10. And Buffalo finishes last, 28, 44, and 8. So the bottom drops out for Buffalo, but they'll be back pretty quick here. The Patrick Division is won by the Flyers, 46, 26, and 8. Capitals 38, 32, and 10. The Islanders 35, 33, and 12. The Rangers 34, 38, and 8. Pittsburgh 30, 38, and 12. And the Devils last 29, 45, and 6. These standings are weird, and I'm going to get into why. There's no change in the Patrick Division at all. Between yesterday's video and today's, there's none. The same 6 teams finished in the same 6 spots. Hartford and Quebec switch place in the Adams. That's it. And LA and Vancouver switch places in the Smythe, and that's it. The Norris, yeah, teams move around, but they're all below 500, so the division in general isn't very good. June 6, 1986, the Boston Bruins acquire Cam Neely. They also get a first-round draft pick, and all they have to give up is Barry Peterson. Peterson is coming off of a bit of a down season for him with 76 points. When they make the trade, he'd been a 100-point scorer. The Canucks desperately needed help down the middle. They wanted a really true number 1 center and felt Peterson would be that, and that Neely had been a bit underwhelming as a Canuck. Of course, we know how that turned out later. March 10th, 1987, the LA Kings traded Marcel Dionne to the New York Rangers. So Dionne moves on from LA, and there'll be a new superstar going into LA pretty darn quick here. The Edmonton Oilers on April 9th of 1987 scored 13 goals versus the LA Kings in the playoffs, and clearly felt bad because they handed LA something kind of important a year later. But at this stage of the game, the LA Kings are pretty bad, and the Oilers let them know that by beating them 13-3. April 12th of 1987, the Montreal Canadiens knocked out the Boston Bruins for the 18th straight time in the playoffs, dating back to 1946. 18 times in a row I've had to report on this. Today's number 18. Makes it all the sweeter when that turns around. February 6, 1987, Mike Bossy has 30 goals, and he becomes the first player in NHL history to score 30 goals in each of his first 10 seasons in the league. April 4th of 1987, Denny Potvin is the first defenseman to hit 1,000 points. Never been done before. Yep, Bobby Orr would have got there if he'd played the games, but his knees gave out on him. Your awards winners, the Hart goes to Gretzky, the Art Ross goes to Gretzky, the Norris goes to Ray Bourque. Pretty good kid there in Boston. Calder goes to Luc Robitaille. Dave Poulin gets the Selke for the Philadelphia Flyers. The Vezina goes to Ron Hextall. The Jennings goes to Patrick Roy and Brian Hayward. Because Montreal always has the lowest goals against, or so it seemed back then. The Adams Trophy for Coach of the Year goes to Jacques Demers, who's in Detroit at this stage of the game. The Lady Byng goes to Joe Mullen of the Flames. The Masterton goes to Doug Jarvis, who's playing for Hartford. Had played 962 straight games, and he would play 2 games the season after this one, and then he would retire. So his record of 964 straight games without missing a game, nobody's ever going to beat that. I know, for Ducks fans, the feeling is Cogliano might have had a shot. Maybe could have, but at this stage, it'll never happen now. The Pearson Award goes to Wayne Gretzky. The Conn Smythe goes to Ron Hextall, and we'll get to that. The Patrick for growing the division or growing hockey in the States goes to Hobie Baker and Frank Mathers. So there you go. Your number 1 draft pick goes to Buffalo. It's Pierre Turgeon, who plays 1,294 games, 515 goals, 812 assists, 1,327 points. And he played for Buffalo, the Islanders, Montreal, St. Louis, Dallas, and Colorado. Curiously, of course, Vancouver avoided that number 1 draft pick going to Boston, and the draft pick that they traded became Glenn Wesley. So a player that the Canucks probably could have used in Glenn Wesley if they'd been making that draft pick and kept Cam Neely. But that's the draft pick that goes to the Boston Bruins, who are already a pretty good team. So Boston comes out of this one laughing, but it's playoff time, which means the laughing's going to die. Division semifinals, Quebec beats Hartford in 6, and the Montreal Canadiens sweep Boston. So this is my first year following Boston as a fan. Cam Neely's playing great. Everything's good. Oh, we're playing Montreal in the first round. This will be fun, Dad. Let's sit down and watch some hockey. 4 games later, my father's heavily gloating, and I'm not a happy camper. Philadelphia beat the Rangers in 6. The Islanders beat Washington in 7. So my heartache goes beyond Boston. I have at this point adopted the Capitals as a team that I really like. And Bob Mason is the goaltender for the Capitals in Game 7 against the New York Islanders, and I desperately want to see a Capitals victory. This is round 1. The game went into 4 overtimes, and this was my first exposure to a really long overtime game. Now, it's something that we're all accustomed to, especially people my age, we're accustomed to long overtime games. There really wasn't a marathon game in this past year's playoffs, 2018 playoffs. But this marathon game between the Islanders and the Capitals was fun. And it was not a boring game. So despite the fact it was going to a 4th overtime, it had been great. And then LaFontaine scores from near the blue line. And what I never forget is how Mason's body language, he just looked absolutely gutted as soon as that puck went in. And the New York Islanders win a game, and the Capitals... I really think that when we talk about the Capitals and the perception they can't get over that hump, I think that game is what started it. Because up until then, the Capitals, they're a pretty good team. Are they ever going to... And then that game happened, and I think it was, they'll never do it. And that's, I think, where that conversation starts. The Toronto Maple Leafs beat St. Louis in the first round. So again, Toronto is tough in the playoffs. First round of the playoffs, if you're playing Toronto, they're going to be tough. And the St. Louis Blues wasted a spot as the top team in the division. The Detroit Red Wings are not willing to sacrifice their home ice advantage against Chicago, and they sweep Chicago. So the Blackhawks, who within the last 10 years have set a record of 16 losses in a row in the playoffs, are now getting swept in the first round again. The Edmonton Oilers beat LA in 5, including that 13-3 shellacking I told you about. Not wanting a miracle on Manchester. I think, really honestly, Edmonton goes into any series with LA at this point like, okay, we have to win this series. Winnipeg beats Calgary in 6. So the Winnipeg Jets fans, who have had almost nothing to cheer about for their existence in the National Hockey League, finally have something to cheer about and make it to the second round against the Oilers. In the second round, the division finals, Montreal beats Quebec in a dogfight in 7. Quebec, after knocking out Hartford as underdogs, extend Montreal to 7 as well, and that was a dogfight. These teams really didn't like each other. The dislike between Montreal and Quebec cannot be overstated. And this is after Montreal came out of a series against Boston, which was a sweep, but again, those two teams didn't really like each other either. Montreal wasn't very popular, and that's not going to change in the next round. Philadelphia beats the Islanders in 7, and that's a pretty solid matchup if I've ever seen one. Detroit beats Toronto in 7, so again, Toronto is difficult to knock out, but they get knocked out in the second round by a Detroit team that, again, looks pretty good. Then the Oilers sweep Winnipeg, so the Oilers are not messing around. This is an Edmonton team that has decided they're marching back to the finals. Remember, the year before is the Steve Smith goal and Calgary goes to the finals instead. So this is an Oilers team that right off the hop is possessed with the idea that they have to win another championship. And they're kind of doing it for Steve Smith. The conference finals, Philadelphia knocks out Montreal in one of the most contentious series in history. And as much as I may not have been cheering for Montreal, by the end of that series, I wasn't really cheering for either team or their fans. It was rough hockey. There was a lot of rough hockey in these playoffs. The Oilers, meanwhile, in the West, take out Detroit in one of the closest 5-game series I'd ever watched. Detroit did very, very well. And their goaltending was fantastic as well, and we'll get to that. But Detroit loses in 5. But they gained a lot of respect out of that series. And the feeling at the time was, hey, these Red Wings may end up winning something soon. Because they're putting together a pretty solid team. And look, the Oilers knocked them out in 5, but the games were close -1. There was one game that was kind of lopsided. The other games were close. And Detroit did take a game off of them, so that's a moral victory of some sort. I'm sure Yzerman didn't declare that any sort of victory. Now in the finals, this is where Ron Hextall takes over. The Oilers win 4-2 in Game 1. They win Game 2 in overtime 3-2. The Flyers then win 5-3 at home, but the Oilers win 4-1 in Philly to take a 3-1 series lead. So what do the Flyers do? They win 4-3 in Edmonton. Almost unheard of, stopping an Edmonton Oilers team from celebrating a Stanley Cup. And then the Flyers win 3-2 at home. The Flyers are pretty good when they got their backs against the wall. And they show that, and yet in Game 7, the Oilers stomped that out with a 3-1 win. So the Flyers within one game of the Stanley Cup because of Ron Hextall. Your goals leader is Yuri Curry with 15 in those playoffs. Your assist leader is Gretzky with 29. Points leader Gretzky with 34. We discussed him yet last night. Your wins leader is Ron Hextall with 15, and Grant Fuhr with 14 is in second place. Save percentage. I haven't talked about this, but let's talk about it. Glenn Hanlon of the Detroit Red Wings, .943 save percentage in 8 games, 2 shutouts, and a 1.67 goals against average. And this is in a time where you've still got a ton of goals being scored. An Oilers team that scored, I think it was 382 goals that year, and he still puts up a pretty decent goals against average and save percentage. So a .943 save percentage, regardless of who you're against, is pretty solid. And second place on the save percentage list was Ken Reggett, who played 13 games for Toronto, and I think he had a .931 that year. So Reggett looked pretty solid in the playoffs too, and there was reason to believe that Toronto was going to get better. So again, playoff time, you see a bit of a different list with heroes than you do with regular season. And Hanlon and Reggett, who wouldn't have got anywhere near the Vezina Trophy during the season, kind of steal the spotlight in playoff stats. Other than that Hextall guy, who played pretty darn well, and yet the Flyers were just that one game short. So the 87 playoffs were the year that I really have to say that I had been a fan of the league. I was a fan of hockey. 87 was when it just went right over the top. That was when, at this point now I'm cheering for Boston, Minnesota, and Vancouver. I've got a team in almost every division. Washington's kind of my team in the Patrick. So when people say, well, Shannon, why do you cheer for so many? There's a team in each division I'm cheering for. And worthy of note that 2 of them missed the playoffs, Minnesota and Vancouver. So more's the pity. Anyways, there you go. The 1986-87 season, which was tremendous fun. And, the Bruins are becoming the Bruins at this stage of the game. But they're quite a ways out from me wearing their jersey again in this series. And Dallas is I'm still quite a ways out from wearing theirs. And Canucks, I'm never going to wear theirs in this series. So, there's that. But there you go. The 1987 season, status quo here. And almost status quo everywhere else except the Norris, where it's kind of a dog's breakfast. But Detroit's going to eventually emerge. Just not yet. As like a true Stanley Cup contender. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.